As many of you know, I have one of my favorite texts in the whole of the Zen tradition is called Zazen Yojinki. This is by Keizan, who is the other ancestor in Soto Zen after Dogen, a couple of generations removed. And these are his instructions for Zazen. They don't get a lot of play, but I think they're remarkable. And we've talked about them before. This is nothing new, but I was invited to spend some time with this text with the members of the Chapel Hill Zen Center this coming Saturday. So I've been spending some time with it again and going over it and being re-inspired. And one line jumped out at me today and it just got me thinking a lot. So I wanted to bring it up with all of you. Keizan writes, "Do not use the Dharma for your own profit. Do not use the way to try to make yourself important. This is the most important point to remember." Do not use the Dharma for your own profit. Now, there are so many different ways to hear this. And of course, one way that I hear it is as a priest, right? As someone who has, for lack of a better word, a kind of brand, right? I have things that I've written, I have things that I've said, we have these videos online, there's a podcast, there's a kind of framing of who I am. So it's not unfair to say that I'm a kind of product. And in my work in the larger Buddhist world, I work all the time with people who are also products, some unwillingly, some uncomfortably, some celebrate it, some are very skillful at it. It's a huge, wide world and a vast spectrum of approaches to how we hold the Dharma in relationship to ourselves as objects. And so that's one very obvious frame for understanding what questions are being brought up here, because we know that some people, a few, literally make a profit from the Dharma. And so we can say, well, Keizan says, don't do that. Okay. But he couldn't have imagined, first of all, exactly what I'm describing. He, of course, saw teachers who rose to prominence, teachers who tried to puff themselves up or benefit in some way from their role. But it was another world. And in order to make sense of what was being said then, we always try to bring it to the kind of the broadest version of today. And the broadest version of today means we're talking about all of us. We're talking about all of us as practitioners being told, do not use the Dharma for your own profit. And in order to understand that, then we have to step back from the idea of profit, right? The idea of having a name, the idea of gaining some wealth from this, because that's a tiny pocket of the world. I do think this applies to everyone. I'm sure it does. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. We talk a lot in Zen about doing things without a gaining mind. And in order to drive that home, we'll even use kind of radical language to suggest that Zen isn't good for anything, that it really serves no concrete purpose or offers any concrete benefit. You just do it for the sake of doing it. And that's a really valuable way of talking about it, but in large part because it undercuts this instinct to get something. And so we have to make a distinction between benefit, I think, and profit. And what comes to mind for me is food. Let's imagine that the Dharma is food. If I eat food, as long as I do it in a way that isn't, well, let's say, as long as I'm making good choices about it, as long as I'm eating the right foods, I benefit. I metabolize it. It becomes me. It disappears. We don't say in that case that I'm profiting from food. There's another way to approach food in which I hoard food. Not to eat it, but to have it. I have pantries filled with everything. I have a refrigerator that's overflowing. It's a simple metaphor, but what happens when you hoard food is that A, you receive no nutrition from it. B, no one else receives nutrition from it. And C, it rots. It is only natural that when we pick up something like the Dharma, when we come to something like Buddhism and the teachings, that we imagine that there's something that we get. Because before we didn't have it, and now we do. So there must be some gain. And if that's true, there must be the potential for more gain. And I want to be very clear, when Keizan says, do not use the Dharma for your own profit, this isn't moralism. This isn't because it's a sin to do so. It's because it's a waste. It's because if you take the wrong approach to the Dharma, no one benefits. And it might cause harm. It might rot. When I came to the Dharma, when I started doing Zazen, when I started reading the books, that felt like a very special thing. No one around me was doing it. I was doing something not only special, but something that connected me to a lineage of people who had gone back 2,600 years. I was in a club. It felt good. It felt like I had a new hat, like I had a new pair of shoes. I walked a little bit differently. I saw myself in the mirror a little bit differently. Not because some amazing thing had happened through practice. Practice was new to me. I had no idea what practice was, not really. I just had an idea of who I was in relationship to it. And who I was someone on the receiving end. It's a great feeling. And I would venture a guess that everyone on this call has had that feeling in some way, in some measure, at some point. We're human. That's normal. The challenge here, the challenge from Keizan, which is the challenge in everything, from everyone in this tradition, is to recognize when we have picked something up and then to have the courage to put it back down. Do not use the Dharma for your own profit. Do not use the way to try to make yourself important. Again, not necessarily important in the world, not necessarily important in the eyes of others, but to make yourself something more. To imagine that there's anything we can do with this practice other than metabolize it, other than make it invisible, other than let it go. To imagine that we can pick this up and put it in our pocket and save it for later. We can't. It's not a business card that we can share. It's not an outfit we can put on. It's a medicine we can take so that it enters our bloodstream and vanishes. And Keizan says this is the most important point to remember. I don't think he's wrong. It's just a different way of saying what everyone is saying. It's a different way of saying what Dogen said. It's a different way of expressing what we discover and either accept or ignore every time we sit. When we sit down in this position, is there a part of us that wants to feel a little better while we do it? Again, that's okay, but why? What's the benefit? The benefit is that if the Dharma is feeding us, if the practice is feeding us, then we in turn get to support others. We get to feed others. We get to put something out instead of keeping it. If we come to this practice, and we all do, if we come to this practice with the idea that there is something we want to gain, then we aren't seeing what this practice is. If we can remind ourselves every day, whether in this posture or walking down the street, that the reason we get something is so that we can give something. If we can remember that the point of the Dharma is to let the Dharma become us, then we can forget about the Dharma and we can get on with the actual work of being alive. That's what's on my mind today. I'll stop there.